Very warm welcome to today's event, Safeguard Your IP in the Era of AI, plus the launch of the PitchMark Ideas.Exchange. And of course, from the get-go, I'd like to really emphasize to the audience, to you, our audience, that this is your event and we want you to take away a greater understanding and appreciation of the lay of the land in which you are operating in. You're all creatives, you know and you're aware of the challenges, but the legal rule book and the rules of the game keep evolving and keep changing. And of course, AI is disrupting and changing the ecosystem in which you operate. So please get stuck into the debate. Don't feel shy. And let's have a really robust exchange of views and ideas. And you can get your questions in advance. Some of you have already done so through our QR code, and our thought leaders, Mark Lowdy, Professor David Llewellyn, Brian Gowes, will do their best to answer them all, and also do answer our poll questions via the QR code so we can get a better understanding of who you are exactly and what domains you operate in, and get a flavor of your priorities so you can really maximize this event today. Right, in terms of the flow, Mark is going to kick things off with a launch demo of the PitchMark Ideas, followed by a rapid-fire exchange that I will moderate, where David, Brian, and Mark will expand on PitchMark and the legal and regulatory terrain in this era of AI. We've also carved out some time for Q&A for all of you, but let's keep this, as I said, interactive and dynamic. So please, if you do want to come in, please do so. This is your event, and we want you to get the most out of it. Now, in just 15 minutes, you will see and get really gain a full understanding of how PitchMark Ideas.Exchange is going to empower you, innovators and creators and businesses, to protect, showcase, and transact their ideas with confidence and efficiency. And you will also get an understanding not just of the technology behind this platform, but also its power to potentially reshape the future of IP collaboration and commercialization. This isn't just a demo. It's a glimpse into the future of collaboration and creativity. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mark now for more on this groundbreaking launch. Mark.
So, Ideas.Exchange. How do we go about making sure that first we deter idea theft? How do we stop people from thinking they can just anyhow take our ideas? But taking it one step further into actually transacting on the idea. Let's say, for example, you're a freelance writer, you've pitched an idea to an editor, and you think, I need to make sure that the editor then hires me to write the story rather than gives it to somebody else. Or perhaps you're an architect and you've received a request to design something, perhaps a wall for somebody's backyard, a nice looking feature wall perhaps. Or perhaps you're a graphic artist, you've been called in for a beauty parade at a multinational. They're looking at choosing their next graphic design agency. In each of these circumstances, you'll want to make sure that you are the one who is engaged. And what we're going to be talking about today is how to firstly deter each of those customer groups from taking your ideas, but more importantly, get paid for it. So let's walk through briefly what this looks like on the Ideas.Exchange. Firstly, you go to the platform, pitchmark.net. If you haven't registered already, here's a good opportunity for you to do so. Once you log in, you end up at your dashboard where your various certificates are kept. This is in essence where you have uploaded your pitching documents, what we might call the written expression of your ideas, and you've generated a certificate. And past certificates will be listed here. Critically, at this juncture, you would then also make sure you fill in how you wish to be paid. Which payment platform are you going to use to get paid? We can walk through that in greater detail. And then comes the first step of generating a certificate. So once again, you've logged in with your freelance story, perhaps that you're pitching to a publisher or an editor. Perhaps it's your architect's design. Perhaps it is a graphic design. You now complete the form and upload that. And in essence, this now creates for you a hash on the Tezos blockchain, which means there is now an indelible record that your idea exists, and you have the certificate to show that you actually pitch-marked it on a particular date at a particular time. Now, so far so good. You can already use that certificate in your presentations. When you're the freelance writer, include the certificate in your email to the editor or the publisher so that they are already on notice that you take your IP seriously. If you're that architect, already attach the certificate to the architectural drawing as you send it to the client so that the architect is once again, or rather the client is on notice that you take your IP seriously. Or once again, the graphic design agency, you're there at the multinational doing your beauty parade, doing your presentation, you include the certificate. At this stage, what you are looking to signal is that you take your IP seriously and at best, perhaps, spark a conversation about what the IP policies are. Have a conversation about your claim to the authorship of that particular idea. Currently, these conversations don't take place. That's why the prospective client tends to think that they can just drop the idea under the table and take it when you're not looking. So the deterrence effect of the certificate can't be understated. But I know what you all care about, and that is actually selling the idea. And that is, in essence, what we're now going to walk through. Back in the dashboard, you now click send in order to generate that offer for the customer. Once you click send, you get taken to the seller's page. This is what it looks like. And you now complete a variety of details. This really isn't rocket science. It's the name and the email address and the phone number of the recipient, together with a title for your document and the value of the certificate. There's other options that you can avail. One is to permanently transfer the certificate to the recipient. The other is to set certain licensing conditions. Those licensing conditions are, again, fairly commonly known. For example, is the license exclusive? Does it adhere to a particular geographic area? Are they able to sublicense it or assign it to somebody else? Is there a time limitation? And a variety of other fairly standard criteria that you're able to license your idea to them. The recipient is then also offered a variety of other choices, which you can see here, which I'm happy to talk through. Once you have completed the form in accordance with your discussion with the licensee, you click Send Offer, and off it goes. This is then putting on the buyer hat. This is what the recipient gets. An email which summarizes the same licensing conditions which you set in the previous form. And obviously, critically, at the bottom here, the opportunity to review and accept the offer. When the buyer then clicks on that, clearly, firstly, they need to log in, create an account on PitchMark if they don't already have it, and then they're able to see your offer in their document. Very simple. They just view, check that it's all in order, all discussed in line with the conversation, and then accept and pay. And that means they then simply use their credit card to transfer the funds to you. There is a confirmation note at the end of that to show that, yes, that offer document has gone through, payment has been made. And now the buyer of the certificate of the idea can also then see their past transactions and their most recent transaction in the platform. Now the transfer has gone through. Once again, it is registered on the blockchain, and they're able to check back in their dashboard to make sure, and you are able to check in your dashboard to make sure that that money has in fact come in. The original certificate is also updated. Whereas before, at the beginning of this process, you would have had the certificate on the left, documenting your registration date and the nature of the documents you registered. Now there is an additional page to that certificate which shows who you have licensed it to. So broadly, those are the fairly straightforward steps. To summarize, step 1, on your PitchMark account, upload your original works, your drawings, your written materials, your sketches, your music, whatever it is that you want to PitchMark. Step 2, you've generated the certificate, now show this to the customer. This is essential. Remember that PitchMark is first of all a deterrence mechanism. You want to signal to the recipient that you take your IP seriously. It's like a steering wheel lock on your car. It can't prevent 100% that somebody won't break into your car. It can't prevent 100% that somebody will steal your car. But you're signaling to the recipient there are other cars that are going to be easier targets. Move on from mine. Step 3, once you're ready to license your idea, go and fill in the licensing conditions. Hit send. Step 4, the customer pays. Very simple process, which I'd strongly encourage you, if you have not already signed up for a PitchMark account, that you do so as at your earliest convenience. And 3, we can see here from the word cloud that actually quite a number of you are in fact in architecture design. I'm seeing here product design, graphic design, software, automotive app development, all areas where IP is generated. Please make sure that you complete the other 2 questions simply by clicking next question when you answer this one. 3.
And the question is this, addressed to you, Mark. When a creator lists work on Ideas.Exchange and a license is transacted, it's the money question. What is PitchMark's fee structure, and what rights does the creator grant to the platform by listing?
Yes, let me answer the second one first. There is no claim to any of the materials that you upload. In fact, when you upload it, it isn't even stored on the PitchMark server. So you're sending up your document, the hash is created, but the document is not kept. So in essence, we have an imprint of this document, but we don't actually store the document. And that's obviously quite essential, especially for you, because you care about your ideas, you don't want to upload them elsewhere. So that's the first and important step. Secondly, that yes, clearly, if there is a transaction, you would expect, for example, Stripe, PayPal, other payment platforms to take a fee, but we pass on as much of that fee, or rather as much of the actual transaction fee as possible. It is significantly less than 10%. It depends a little bit on the actual platform that you use for the transaction, but you should have 94% of the proceeds deposited into your account. And that happens straight away. So once again, there is no delay. The money is not kept anywhere. As soon as the buyer purchases it, as fast as Stripe and PayPal and in future other platforms can get it to you, it is deposited straight away.
And Mark, just to be clear to our audience, the underlying architecture is the blockchain. Can you shed a little bit of light as to how the certificates and the licenses that are linked to this creative input exist on the blockchain, yes, and how that works?
Yes. So firstly, the blockchain we use is called Tezos, which has a particular specialization in intellectual property and in fact in contracts generally. They're all smart contracts, but you need to be quite choosy about the blockchain. And so that's why we moved across to Tezos. I would add that in order to transact, you are not actually paid in Tezos coin. We transact on the Tezos blockchain, but all the transactions are in cold hard cash because you as a creative, you want to be paid in cash. You don't want to then be paid in some sort of cryptocurrency where you're not sure what the transaction rate is. And it's all rather complicated anyway to then have the account, the MetaMask account or whatever it is to be able to transact on crypto. So you do get paid in good old fashioned dollars.
Fantastic. Mark, thank you very much indeed for that nuts and bolts overview of how the PitchMark exchange operates and works. And let's take a closer look, not just at PitchMark, but at the rapidly evolving and often bewildering array of regulation and laws governing AI and your industries. And we've lined up three incredible thought leaders. And I'd like to invite on stage now Professor David Llewellyn, distinguished lawyer, teacher, and arbitrator whose decades of expertise in intellectual property law have shaped both academia and practice across Asia and Europe. Brian Gowes, a leading technology and IP lawyer, recognized as one of the region's top voices in the intersection of law, technology, and commerce, with a career spanning Microsoft, IBM, and his own firm, Gowes LLC. And rounding off our powerhouse trio, of course, is Mark Lowdy, good friend of mine. We go way back, managing partner of PitchMark LLP, serial entrepreneur, and former CNBC anchor who now mentors leaders in media and presentation while championing platforms that protect and empower creative ideas. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Right, let's start with AI. AI is the gorilla in the room, isn't it? How does this complicate the lay of the land for our audience, and how does it complement or complicate what PitchMark does? And David, do you want to take that one first?
David's favorite topic?
Well, I think being the age I am, I can look back on various overhyped topics, but I can't remember any subject that has been as overhyped as AI. Yes, it is a disruptive development, but is it as bad as everybody is saying for creatives? No, I don't think it is. Any more than was 3D printing, any more than was the invention of the photocopier, any more than many of these other disruptive technologies. It just depends on how it's used. So whenever I hear initiatives like the one we've just had described to us, I think great, because the whole world of intellectual property is very difficult. And anything that makes people think, rightly or wrongly, that you know what you're doing in this area helps when you are trying to transact with other people.
David, can I bring you in? And can you give us some color on the lay of the land and the rules of the road over here in Singapore post Singapore Copyright Act 2021? Because it's tricky terrain, isn't it? Because the challenge is whether the law is striking the right balance between the rights of creators and ultimately allowing machine learning and AI to use existing creative material to do what they do and develop.
That would be Brian.
Sorry, pardon me, Brian.
Sorry, I was actually thinking that was for David.
Too many great minds.
All right. So I was just reflecting on what David was saying, and I agree, because as I was preparing for this talk, I was thinking that in many ways the battles that have been fought in court are very similar to what was being fought maybe 20 years ago when Google first came out. And they were being sued by enormous number of publishers, because if you remember, Google was scanning books, and people felt that their IP was being taken. So in many ways, this is a replay of what happened with Google. The difference though is that AI has scale that Google doesn't have, in the sense that there's just one Google, but everybody with a computer has access to an AI model. And the scale is such that more people can generate works using AI than ever before. So I think it's just a question of scale. I don't think the issues or the principles change very much with the change in technology. It's a scale, though, that is the big difference. 2021 Copyright Act. I think what has happened, and David, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to make a plug for his book. If you want to read more about copyright, David's got a book on copyright that came out, a couple of years ago now? Just after the 21 Copyright Act was released. I find from IPs, from a creative's perspective, there seems to be a greater acknowledgement of the rights of creatives. So before we started, I was speaking to Shri, and one of the things which I noticed, and this is the example being used, like say wedding photographers, prior to, well, even now actually, the view is that if I'm getting a wedding couple, I engage a wedding photographer, the person takes the photographs of my wedding, I, as the person paying for it, I own the copyright, I own the image of the couple, the wedding couple. And that was the thinking before. With the act, the new act, it's pretty clear that the photographer owns the image rights by default. By default, the photographer owns the image rights. However, the reality in practice is very different, and I think a lot of the audience will understand this. Having the law say one thing and clients still believing that if I paid you for a service, I own everything, it hasn't sort of translated so well yet. So it comes back to like today's session is education.
Yeah, and I think one of the things which, if you actually read the terms and conditions under which you use AI platforms, you will be as shocked as you are if you actually bother to read the terms and conditions of Twitter or of Facebook, under which you give a license to all your intellectual property to Facebook or Twitter when you put something onto that platform. So, and you of course just tick, I agree, without ever reading those terms and conditions. In the same way as when you use ChatGPT and you actually bother to read the terms and conditions of use, it says in there that the user owns all or any rights that may exist in the output. What OpenAI does not tell you is there are no rights in the output. But what they want to do is shift risk away to the user as much as they possibly can. So a lot of this is all about the contracts that you will be signing as well. If you are commissioned by somebody to do a design, if you are asked to tender by somebody to produce a design, there are going to be conditions under which you will be supplying that information, that intellectual property, if you like.
So ultimately, does it mean that the odds are stacked against the creatives if there are so many loopholes which work to the advantage of big business and the clients? And Brian, I want to bring you in here because there's a question that I think perhaps touches on those loopholes. And the question is this: if a framework is taught by a third party without attribution and time-stamped documentation predates that teaching, what recourse exists without commercial loss? Can you join the dots on that one?
Repeat that again.
Of course.
If
a framework is taught by a third party without attribution and time-stamped documentation predates that teaching, what recourse exists without commercial loss?
So I'm a bit confused about when they say without commercial loss. It comes back to evidential, the fact that it's time-stamped is evidence. And it can show that the creator at that point in time was the first person to create that work. And if a third party has then published that work or used it for commercial purpose, the creator technically may have a right to that work.
I think they're two separate issues in a way, because I think there is an urban myth that if you, for example, cut and paste something off the internet and then put it into a presentation, then as long as you attribute where you've got it from, then there's no problem. That's an urban myth, unfortunately. Just because you attribute something does not mean to say, double negative, you are not infringing copyright. And so this area is unfortunately quite difficult. And for that reason, the more we can educate people about what are their rights and what they are not, the better.
Perfect segue to Mark. Mark, how does PitchMark, given this thicket of copyright law, rubber hitting the road with AI infringement there, how does PitchMark help level the playing field for the creative industry?
Yes, thicket is the right word. And the answer is that it, in essence, says, because of this thicket, let's create some clarity. The thicket that exists during a pitch is even worse, right? You're sitting there with the client, you're pitching your idea, you're hoping that they will like the idea, of course. You don't want to make it too difficult, but you don't want them to take the idea in the process. So by saying, here is a conversation starter, here is the certificate where we have date stamped, we do have the evidence. You're in essence taking advantage of the fact that there is such a thicket, and you're saying, let's cut through it all and have a conversation. Currently, those conversations don't take place. The person pitching doesn't want to have this conversation because they don't want to say something that'll upset the prospective client. The client also doesn't want to say anything lest they now stir the hornet's nest about a whole conversation about IP. Along comes the PitchMark certificate. And now, okay, let's have this conversation. But it takes it one step further, because obviously you don't just want to present the idea, you want to get paid for it. And this is an important aspect of the Ideas.Exchange. You've not only created the certificate, you've now given the client a choice. It's no longer just take it and I will produce this graphic design campaign for $200,000, or leave it. That tempts people to steal. Now the choice you give them is, you can engage us for $200,000 and we hope you will. But if you think you can find somebody cheaper to execute on this, be my guest. Just pay us 10% of that price and the idea is yours, unencumbered. Here is the license. And that is a choice which then, if you do take this to court, hopefully it'll never get there. Prevention is 1,000 times better than the cure when it comes to the law. Sorry, gentlemen. The fact is that the court will now look at this not as a copyright issue, but as a contractual one. Because you're now saying, I offered the contract, you declined the contract. I gave you a discount on the contract, you still declined it. Clearly, you're not acting in good faith. That's a very different conversation.
Mark, can I just ask?
Please.
I assume for this exchange to become successful, you must have the potential clients prepared to play as well. Because if I'm a small designer and I go to somebody, I say, here's my PitchMark certificate. They say, oh, I don't want to talk to you then. I'll talk to somebody who is not informed. How do you respond to that?
Oh, thank goodness you dodged the bullet. Thank goodness they were so open and upfront that there was, in fact, a strong risk that they were going to take your ideas. Anybody who says, oh, well, as a result of you having the certificate, I'm not sure I want to deal with you, should give you some pause that perhaps they're looking for an easier target. Thank goodness you dodged the bullet.
But this is also about PitchMark building a broader ecosystem of innovators, lawyers, and it's interesting, and I'm sure our audience will be interested to hear more about the PitchMark Global Legal Network, a network that's growing, and that's a formidable ally for creators. So it's about, to your point, about education and awareness. It's about clients and the big businesses that are receiving these pitches honoring and understanding what the PitchMark certification stands for.
Yes, absolutely. And incidentally, Brian is one such lawyer. The reason why we have a global legal network is to preempt your need for a lawyer. So in the past, what might happen is you've presented your ideas, you just sent along the naked PDF, no copyright notices, no certificate, nothing. The recipient then somehow hands it to somebody else to execute. You then get wind of that, presumably because you see the billboard with your designs or some other publication. And then you hunt around for a lawyer thinking, who can help me to get some advice? The idea is to turn that around and say, we're going to introduce you to the lawyer when you start, so that when you have problems or questions, you immediately have somebody to go to. But it comes back to the original idea that we ideally would provide that education. You would be in touch with somebody who can give you advice before litigation. If you've ever been involved as a plaintiff or defendant in court, you will know just how much of your time this will take, just how much of your energy this will take, just how much time and money this will take. Prevention is definitely better than the cure.
I was going to say,
of course,
I was going to add something, that the reality, having worked with creatives, is always a problem of unequal bargaining power. The little guy versus the big corporation. And we all kind of know who wins. But I do believe that as more of the individual creators particularly are becoming more educated in their rights, they're able to push back bit by bit. It's a very long game, but you start pushing back and you show the big guy, you actually know your rights. If you want to give away your rights, that's fine, but at least you are doing it intentionally, that you're giving away your rights. Or, as Mark has said, I'm going to give you away my rights, but I'm going to charge a little premium for that. And so when I work with creatives, it really comes down to, and I tell them this is how you negotiate with a large corporation. And I'll give them hints, they'll go back, and there's some back and forth. They may not get everything they want, but neither does the big guy. So, there is a compromise. And I was going to say small things. Small things help, like, of course, the PitchMark certificate, but even putting labels on your documents, not for third-party use, confidential. All these do send messages to the recipient that you're not, they just can't willy-nilly, pass this around to everybody.
And I actually think as well that the AI revolution, if you like, is going to make authenticity even more important and valuable in the future than it is today, than it was before the AI revolution. And there are things that designers can do very early on to try and create a brand, because it's the brand that is their brand that is going to be valuable to them in future, rather than necessarily the ideas, or even if you move on to what intellectual property rights can exist in, drawings, for example, or other material that they may create. Because remember, there is no intellectual property in an idea. And that's one of the fundamental things which I teach at the beginning of every intellectual property course. You do not own your ideas. Once you tell other people them, they're out there, unless there's a contract saying that they are confidential with the person you're revealing them to. And so creating, as Brian said, drawings which say at the bottom, copyright you 2026, on registering your name as a trademark in relation to architectural services, if you're a freelance architect. Those type of things are all going to build up your own intellectual property right portfolio, because there's a big difference between intellectual property rights as legal rights and what the man and woman in the street think of as intellectual property, which does include ideas, but intellectual property rights do not.
David, there is a question for you. In scholarly work, which you have direct experience of, does copyright protect the first written expression of a discovery, or does the discovery itself, and you touched on this, enter the public domain once published?
Well, unfortunately, there are a mix of a few things. Again, writing something down gives you a copyright, because that is an expression of an idea. So you have a copyright in the way you write it down. If, however, you want to protect, in this case, a discovery, which might be a new chemical entity if you're in a science laboratory, then you need to apply for a patent. And it's a patent that protects either novel products or novel processes. And so it depends is the answer, which is always the answer you'll get from lawyers, is it depends on the facts.
And David, there's another SCA question for you. And it goes like this. When an AI system trains on publicly available original work and reproduces its arguments without attribution, does the creator have any recourse under the Singapore Copyright Act 2021?
Well, the answer is, again, it depends on how the LLM is created and also whether or not there really is reproduction in a copyright sense at all. I would argue very strongly that there is not reproduction because you put in your prompt and what comes out is as a result of big data munching of every single piece of information in that database. And the fact that it comes out as a very similar list of things as may have been trained on does not mean to say that is copyright infringement. And so this is an issue which is being litigated around the world at the moment, whether it's in the United States or it's in the UK with Stability Diffusion, in the United States with OpenAI and various others. Midjourney is involved in some litigation as well. The courts are starting to struggle with this, and it's going to take a long time before we get anything remotely resembling clarity.
Just to go back, because David mentioned generative AI and authenticity, there are products coming out in the market, and PitchMark could also eventually move this way, is metadata. So creatives, especially in the digital realm, are starting to put in very specific watermarking metadata into their products. So it's very clear that this is authentic. Or I think, in fact, the new professional cameras from Nikon or Canon, there is a consortium where the photographs are actually digitally watermarked, and you can tell that they have not been manipulated. And so, the technology evolving, it's things like this which creatives should sort of look at to basically ensure that they continue to build their brand and their products are authentic.
I would, of course, concur that the more the technology is there, the better. But for the prospective buyer sitting opposite you, right? Or maybe, back to my earlier example, the newspaper editor or publisher who's sitting opposite you, you're sending your article. You want them to publish and pay you the $1,600, $2,000, whatever it is, for your article. Is that data is that metadata, is that technology going to help you? To my thinking, all of this is actually a communication problem. How do we signal to the prospective client, don't rip off my ideas? That the technology embeds come later, right? If you really do have to litigate, then you can say, aha, you see, it's watermarked with my metadata. Doesn't help you during the pitch. So I would, again, just urge you to think about the prevention aspect and make them think twice. And hopefully that technology will never need to be called upon.
Can we really stake out and be clear as to what PitchMark is and is not? And you used the steering wheel analogy, Mark, which I thought was a very germane one. This is not a cast iron guarantee. I remember you describing this as saying this is not going to guarantee protection from IP theft or infringement. So PitchMark, is it correct to understand PitchMark as a stake? You're staking a claim of ownership in the idea that you are aware of your rights and you're ready to enforce them if necessary. Is that how this audience should think about what PitchMark in essence is?
Yes, deterrence. Stake your claim in the written expression of the idea. And deterrence is all about signaling, here's the certificate. Let's have a conversation. If you were to say, well, but it needs to be 100% foolproof, these gentlemen would also be out of a job. The fact is that there is always room for interpretation. There is always room for somebody to make a claim. There is always somebody who thinks they can get away with it by saying, oh, well, I happen to have the same idea just, 6 weeks ago, but has no evidence to prove it. So the bottom line is that we have to act to deter the sort of behavior from happening to begin with. And that places this very much, to your first question, places PitchMark very much in the realms of a communication platform.
Very interesting question on Mentimeter. In competitions, where organizers request proposal/design submission, will having a PitchMark certificate as part of our submission be a turn-off to organizers?
Well, first of all, I think that's a fantastic question. And if you're thinking about it in those terms, you absolutely should PitchMark it. And by the way, job interviews, I'm hearing is another one of those issues where you get invited to a job interview, they ask you to work on some sort of project, only to then find that you don't get the job, but they take your project ideas. So these sort of things happen all the time. Can I offer? If the competition says, as a result of you having a PitchMark certificate, as a result of you signaling that you know your rights, we don't want to work with you, thank goodness you dodged that bullet. Now, Brian made the point. If you really want to give your ideas away for free, be my guest. But then don't be surprised or, cry foul later on if your idea goes walking. Incidentally, one thing we haven't touched on today, but we've also developed, is an IP governance certification program. This is actually catered to the buy side. The idea is to create certain standards according to various GRI, ISSB, and ISO standards, where the recipient can vouch for the fact that we have the processes and the mindsets in place to steward the IP of our vendors very well. This becomes a supply chain sustainability question. So not to sidetrack too much, but it takes two to tango, and there are opportunities for both sides to step up and be a bit smarter.
And maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but it's a good way to think about the PitchMark certificate as a non-disclosure agreement light, or not as hardcore as an NDA.
Yes, that might be a starting point. If you can get your prospective client to sign an NDA, chopped, with a commissioner for oaths and all of those good things, be my guest. It's just not the reality in most cases. If you front up to a multinational and say, I need you to sign an NDA before I pitch to you, what are they going to say? Oh, goodness, well, let's take a look at this document. Goodness, this spans 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 pages.
That's going to be a very short conversation.
We're going to have to send that to legal before we sign anything. That's why it's just impractical. Plus, I saw earlier on in the word cloud that a couple of you had said that you're pitching business ideas. VCs, financiers, routinely do not sign NDAs. They, out of principle, don't sign NDAs because they say, I get so many ideas every day. If I had to sign an NDA, I'd be signing NDAs all day. So again, if you're the one asking that question, if you can get an NDA, perfect. If you can engage Brian to do the trademark for you, perfect. If you can go to a patent lawyer and get the patent office, the official seal, do it. It's just that usually doesn't apply during a pitching process or some of these smaller transactions like sending an article to an editor. What, are you going to patent your story? That's not realistic. So the only choice you really have is this PitchMark certificate.
Okay, a couple of things on what Mark's just said. First of all, lawyers will never be got rid of. We're like cockroaches. I mean, the only issue is how many will there be, and they'll just morph into something else. But I think the other important point is many large organizations do not sign non-disclosure agreements and may be worried about PitchMark as well because they don't know what they know. Because they're large, a lot of people within their organization have ideas every day, and they don't know whether what is being disclosed to them by this person who's come to this pitch meeting is something which somebody has already disclosed to them yesterday or a week ago or a month ago. And this is always the problem in the pharmaceutical industry or the games industry. People who go with an idea in the past for a board game to a company like Waddington's or Hasbro or whatever, they would never sign a non-disclosure agreement because they didn't know whether they already had their developers working on another look-alike Monopoly game. And so they would never sign a non-disclosure agreement.
Mark, just a quick one from me with my journalist's hat on. In the conversations that you've had in building this broader ecosystem, which must involve the clients the big guys and the big businesses. How open are they? How receptive are they to onboarding the PitchMark concept?
Yes. Broadly speaking, of course, the first reaction is, what's this? What is the certificate? What is it about? Conversation that usually doesn't happen about IP rights. And it's, in fact, after our session today, in the coming days and weeks, we're actually running workshops for how to have that conversation. Role play workshops where you can learn actually how to bring this up in a way that the client still wants to buy from you. That's clearly essential. But again, the idea is that you are sparking a conversation with the recipient. And if the recipient says, well, I'm not sure about that, then you might actually be better off. Now, you still have a choice. Maybe you still want to send your drawings or your planned designs or whatever. If that's what you want to do, be my guest.
I'm conscious of time. I think we're doing all right. And I'm very conscious that there may be some questions from our audience here. Anyone like to share or contribute or ask our thought leaders? Yes.
All right. So as a product designer, when I...
Sorry, sir. Can you just tell us who you are?
All right. My name is Matt. I came from NAFA, Nanyang Academy of Fine Art, and I'm a lecturer for product design. So I understand that for patents in particular, from IP, that any drawings, anything that you disclose, be it online or be it anywhere, it kind of acts as a prior art and you go against your filing process. So will the fact that I file a PitchMark certificate be obstructing me in that, or how does that work?
Firstly, you used the word patent. Would you just like to clarify this whole prior art conversation? Is this a patenting issue?
No, I don't. I think if you're into product design, rarely are patents relevant.
Design.
It's usually registered designs.
Okay.
And, well, it depends on the country you're in. In Singapore, it's registered designs. In the United States, it's design patents. In China, there are also design patents. So it depends which country you're in. But that shouldn't be a problem, because if you are designing products, you will usually be relying on copyright. Or sometimes these days, people even register the shape of a product as a trademark. So, and the prior art issue doesn't apply there.
Cool. And just bolting on from that, remember that the aim of the certificate is to deter somebody from ripping it off. Maybe you want to publish the certificate along the prior art on your website. Maybe you will only provide the certificate when you're going along to somebody and saying, here, license my designs for your coffee mugs, t-shirts, whatever it happens to be. The aim of the certificate is to spark that conversation and to make anybody who thinks that they can just take your ideas think twice. Yeah, Matt, he looks a little bit too much trouble. He's got the certificate thing, which I'm not really all that sure about. I like his idea, but I'm now not going to rip it off. Let's have a conversation about how you get paid. That's where we want to take the very practical, pragmatic, on-the-ground conversations.
All right. Thanks for clarifying.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Matt. Would anybody else in the audience here in Singapore like to come in? Otherwise, I can move on.
Yep.
Hi, so my name is Wen Ting, and I'm currently a freelancer. But I do have some interest in producing products. And I have a question is, what is my rights and what can I use PitchMark to protect my IP if I'm not necessarily selling an idea, but I'm just engaging a supplier in, let's say, China to make my product. So in what PitchMark can help me to protect my rights?
Mm-hmm.
Very good question.
This is a supplier arrangement rather than but in a sense, they are your customer, aren't they? Because you want to send your designs to them.
So let's say I'm producing a bag. So I'm engaging a supplier from China, and I do hear that there's a lot of IP rights, stuff where they will, when you engage them, they will take their idea and reproduce them similar to what you
hear that all the time, isn't it? So once again, what are your choices? Choice A, I'll just send my ideas. No worries. I'll just send what, as I referred earlier, as the naked PDF. No password protection, no branding. I'll just send it along. And yeah, of course, the recipient's going to look at that and say, oh, wow, nice designs. I think we can produce these ourselves here, and not get you any royalty. What are the other options? You can force them to sign an NDA. Sounds like not a bad option. Ideally with counsel who has jurisdiction in China. Right? In that case, that might be very useful. At the very least, you'd want to send a PitchMark certificate, because if they then say, oh, well, I'm not sure we can produce this bag for you, then the job of the certificate is already done. Right? You've already dodged that bullet that I mentioned earlier from somebody who's been forced to think twice. Anything you'd like to add about the NDAs?
Well, I think the most important thing you can do in the first place is to do your checking on who the Chinese company is and find out whether they are known for producing the same product in the factory next door as soon as you send them the design. Because doing your own homework on whether they are a reputable company is often time well spent. Because these type of problems cost a lot of money to resolve. And often my advice to clients is to say, leave it. The Chinese market's big. You both can coexist, rather than spending a lot of money chasing after somebody who suddenly disappears here and then appears somewhere else. So you need to do your checking on making sure that the supplier who's going to be making your products is a reputable one. Talk to other people who've used them, find out whether they are reputable, and then cross your fingers.
It's true, because due diligence is super important. I've acted for apparel companies who manufacture in various countries, and so much of the counterfeit goes out the back door, surplus stock. And even their inspectors can't tell the difference, because it comes from the same factory between the legitimate stuff and the backdoor counterfeit. Essentially the same factory, same people, they just produce 1,000 more of the products. And so it comes back to making sure you know who you're dealing with. And the fact that if you have a vendor who understands and respects, as Mark says, PitchMark certificate or IP, that's halfway there already.
And building your brand as well, so that people are looking for your brand. So you've got your handle on Xiaohongshu, you've got all these things which surround your product as well.
Thank you for that question. One of my own. I mean, there is a perception that big business, they are the bad actors, they are the bad guys, so to speak. But let me just devil's advocate this. Is there any safeguard built in within the PitchMark process that prevents AI-created work from being passed off by some creatives as original? Is it fair to perceive creators perhaps as being disingenuous in this era where AI can replicate so effectively?
Yes. So firstly, there is an honor system. When you PitchMark something, you have to disclose which platform you used and how much of the creative work is in fact generated by AI. And my learned friends would be able to explain why that's so important, especially in the United States. But the second part that this plugs into is, how can you differentiate yourself when you're on the buy side? I can't think of any companies off the top of my head who have a stated policy to rip off the ideas of the people who come to them with them. I mean, that's almost obvious. So where does the IP theft then actually happen? It is usually the individual. There is, again, perhaps a less scrupulous individual working in the procurement department or the marketing department or wherever it is where these ideas come in. And, perhaps for their own career purposes, they're saying, well, if I can take some of these good ideas and position them as my own, then I'll win favor with my boss and get the promotion I've been looking for. So in general, idea theft is not a corporate thing. It isn't very much an individual thing. For this reason, when you PitchMark something, you actually don't just put the name of the company that you're pitching to. you put the name of the individual. Because when they receive the certificate along with your PDF documents or whatever else you're pitching, and they see their own personal name on it, again, the idea is to make them think twice and say, oh goodness, this is a bit too close for comfort. I'm not sure I'm now going to rip off this idea. Yeah, I'd better be honest about this. On a corporate basis, I mentioned earlier, the PitchMark IP Governance Certification Program is designed to help companies meet certain GRI, ISSB, and ISO standards for IP stewardship. But ultimately, it is the individual who we need to influence.
And I think one needs to remember as well that there are certain self-help measures that all designers can take, like using the copyright symbol on any drawings or any of their material, because it has no legal significance, but it makes people think you understand what the game is and that you will claim copyright in that. Or use a little TM beside the name of the product that you've put on your bag, because again, that has no legal significance, but it makes it seem as if it's a trademark, even if you haven't got it registered. Although you can't put an R in a circle beside it unless it's a registered trademark, because that's a criminal offense. So there are certain things, self-help things that you can do to help make it seem as if you know what this game is all about. And that's also, I think, what PitchMark is all about.
I think we're moving into an era where you're going to start seeing on social media, we've all seen it, what we call AI slop. You know, there are a lot of creatives who want viewership, they're being paid for, and the amount of AI slop coming out is just going to be huge. And we can all tell this was created by AI. So it comes back to the point again of creating your own brand. People know who you are, the quality of your videos, for example, that you're putting up there. And again, using all these indicia that this was created by a human being is going to be more and more important. People are prepared to be paid for that versus AI slop that you're going to be seeing on TikTok, for example.
Mark, I've got a question, and we'll round off. I'm very conscious of time. And it echoes a question on Mentimeter from one of our audience members. How do you compare to your closest competitor in terms of the blockchain certification? I.e., is there anybody else that you are aware of that's doing what you're doing?
No, which is precisely why the payments is such an important addition. You know, traditionally people say, well, I just need to email myself, or rather send an envelope to myself with the written expression inside, and the postmark will count as a legal verification of the data that it was stamped. Has zero deterrent effect, of course, right? That has to be said. But we want to take it one step further and not just make that deterrent effect with the certificate, but to actually get you paid. Back to, for example, the freelance writer I mentioned at the beginning. Step one, PitchMark your documents before you send them to the editor, include the PitchMark certificate so that the editor doesn't think that they can just get somebody else in the newsroom to write your story, yes, or publish your story without compensation. The editor then looks at the certificate and says, well, we will want to have the certificate in-house if we're going to run the story, because I don't want to then be sued by this freelance writer. We'll pay for the certificate. Meaning to say that as the freelance writer, you can traditionally send your story with an invoice, which will hopefully get paid in the next 6 months. Or you can send the story with a PitchMark certificate, which the editor can purchase straight away, ideally before publication. So we're seeing PitchMark actually have multiple benefits, of which the deterrence to idea theft is just one. Getting paid faster is actually another.
And let's just round off on a positive note, perhaps, because the sense that I'm getting from PitchMark is that creatives, small guy, they're not alone. There is this Jedi Council, if you will, of great legal minds that you are building. Talk to us a bit more about PitchMark Global Legal Network. This is a network that is growing. I believe it's a community of about 1,000 lawyers. That's a formidable ally for creatives.
At 16, correct. I mean, there are lots of communities that we need to build. And I, at risk of now expanding in great detail, the community of lawyers. Also the community of what it's like on the buy side. We understand that when you're on the buy side, it's also not easy. You get pitches all the time. You didn't ask for many of them. And it might actually be true that some of the ideas that are being pitched to you, somebody else in the organization has already thought of. It's not easy being on the buy side either. But on the sell side, on the innovator side, that community that you speak of is actually also critically important. For this reason, on our homepage, you actually see the pitch feed, where we publish not the idea, but the existence of the idea, the recipient, what the idea is. What is it? A presentation material? Is it a drawing? Is it a piece of music? So that we are already putting it out there, this idea exists, and that other members of the community are aware that this idea exists and who you've sent it to. So you can see that there are multiple touch points, how this community needs to come together to deter IP theft or idea theft, and together raise the levels of sophistication and at least spark these conversations.
David, Brian, final thoughts. David?
Everything that improves the lot of the individual designer, the individual innovator is a good idea as far as I'm concerned. But I don't think that people should think this means it is going to be easy. It's not.
I was going to say there's a lot of self-help information out there. Obviously, you can, go to your friendly AI LLM. You can go to iParsers website. There's a lot of information out there which you can just read to at least, fully understand what your rights are.
Gentlemen, very grateful for your time today. This has been fascinating and illuminating conversation. I've certainly learned from this. I really hope that our audience here in Singapore and online across Southeast Asia have too. Thank you very much indeed for coming. And the conversation does not stop here. Please join us for refreshments if you are in Singapore, of course. And for those of you who do remain here in Singapore, Mark is on hand, by the way, for a live demo, I believe, of the Ideas.Exchange. So thank you very much indeed for joining us on this Friday afternoon.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
Thank you.